Hello, I'm Britt Udison, Executive and Artistic Director at the Loft Literary Center. Welcome to this live stream at Virtual Wordplay. I'm so glad you're here with us. Before we get started, I want to talk a little bit about what brought us here today. For the last year, the Loft staff has been working hard to put together an outdoor book festival that would have gathered 100 authors with 10,000 visitors in our neighborhood in downtown Minneapolis. As COVID-19 hit, we knew we had to think about everything we do differently, especially this festival. While we were disappointed that we wouldn't be able to gather in person, we became even more committed to supporting writers, celebrating new books, and finding new ways to assert the connective power of the written word. In a time of anxiety, we want to offer a powerful event for readers, writers, and booksellers. When we first approached our sponsors, their first question was, what is a virtual festival? And to be honest, we didn't know. Our founding partners, St. Catherine University and Star Tribune, agreed to make a leap of faith with the Loft. With courage, generosity, and vision, they have worked alongside us to figure out what this virtual festival might become. We are grateful to our sponsors and donors. Their generosity is incredible, but it is not enough. We believe it is essential, especially during a health and financial crisis, to offer programs that are free and accessible to all. But that has led to a significant revenue loss. A live event would have included ticket revenue, beer sales, exhibitor fees, and additional sponsorships. The Loft is not closed. We continue to offer classes, fellowships, conversations, support for readers and writers in addition to this festival. We are here to support the literary community, and we ask that you continue to support us. If you are able, please consider making a contribution to the Loft today. Thank you for being here.
Hey everyone, welcome to this Loft Wordplay session. Today we're talking Black Girl Magic with authors Junauda Petrus, author of The Stars and the Blackness Between Them, and Ashley Woodfolk, author of When You Were Everything, in discussion moderated by Patrice Caldwell, editor of, collaborator on Phoenix First Must Burn. Today's event is, and all of Wordplay is sponsored and presented by St. Catherine University and the Star Tribune. Very grateful to them for making our events possible this spring. You can also purchase our authors' books. Somewhere on your screen, there's a button to go buy those from our friends over at Red Balloon Bookstore. So definitely do that. Support your local indies, support these authors and their awesome work. I'm going to hand it over now to Patrice and our authors. Thanks so much for doing this, y'all.
Ray!
Thanks for having us.
So we're going to get started. I guess my first thing is I want you to talk a bit about your book. And like, I guess tell me like, what's your favorite thing about your book?
You can go first.
Yeah, I mean, so a Phoenix First Must Burn.
I'm cool with that, you know. But you feel like you. Oh yeah. Oh shoot, my
bad. You gotta show your book.
Oh.
Go.
So the question is,
This is not gonna go.
the only reason why I'm being so obedient is because I had a spiritual awakening this morning. So you're welcome. Just kidding.
Let's make Ashley go first.
Y'all, we just met like a minute ago. This is so exciting. Like literally, we're just like getting along famously. I think what I feel is my favorite thing. There's so many favorite things I have about my book. You mean just to ask one? Like I really have to say just one?
Okay, sure, like two.
Okay. I love the sexuality in it, like this sort of tender, like young queer sexuality in it. And I love the sort of Black, sort of existential, exoteric, like astrological edge to it.
Ooh, okay, I like that. I also like how you had like a pose. Right?
My favorite thing about your book
Yes, I love it. Let's do that. Let's do that version.
was the voices and how distinct they were. Because as someone who has written multiple POVs before, I felt like I was never lost. I always knew who the chapter, like I could open it up to any page and I would know exactly who was talking. And not just because one of your characters has an accent, like that definitely was orienting in a way, but they were just so different. And I felt like you did their voices so well that like, yeah, any page, I was like, oh, I know exactly who this is. So.
But I actually feel like that's like, to me, I feel like that's perfectly leading. That's like both your strengths, I feel like you're both so good at voice. I mean, thinking about Ashley, your first book, and of course the start, like I think you both just have like fantastic voices to just leap off the page and they feel really teen,
Yeah.
Like you just, there's so many emotions. There's so emotional.
So many emotions. We're emotional.
Yes. And you're going through it. And I liked how you said tender. Like I do feel like your book has this tenderness to it that feels like it was written with care, which of course I'm sure it was, it feels very, I cried a lot.
So many tears. So many tears.
But I also felt like it was going to be okay because I was like, you know what? I don't know. I think I think when I think about like Black queer authors, I think there's like a certain like comfort because I kind of know you're not going to drag me totally through the dirt because I know that like you're okay, and to some extent, I guess, And so I know that you're going to make sure that I'm okay reading this book, It's not going to be so triggering that, like, it made me relive a lot of things, but it wasn't so hard.
But you're going to be taken care of.
Yeah.
End of the day. Yeah. Let me answer the question.
Yes, please.
My favorite thing about my book is two things. One, the whole character of Dom, who is the Cleo's love interest. It's a boy. And he's just like a cinnamon roll and he's like so cute. And the sweetest and super honest, and he cooks and all of those things. And so I loved Dom. I loved writing him. I loved writing a dark-skinned, beautiful Black boy who was kind and sweet and was okay with being tender, okay with sort of showing his softer side, because Black men and Black boys aren't often allowed that in media and in real life. So that was really lovely to do. And also there is a very epic makeout scene during a thunderstorm in which the power goes out. That is my favorite chapter of the book. So those are my two favorite things.
That is hilarious. So Ashley, you've now written 2 books.
Indeed.
Wow.
Talk to me about that. And they're standalone. So what do you, and then also you've written a short story in my anthology. So
Yeah.
I think what is kind of for
A couple
you?
of short stories.
Oh yeah.
None of the other ones are out yet though, so it's fine.
Okay. Good to know. So talk to me about crafting stories? Like, how does it start for you? We can switch this, both of you can honestly answer this question. How does it start for you? How do you approach your worlds? And then kind of, I think it's like, how does it feel to leave and move on? Because they're standalones, right? So how does it feel to like be like, goodbye?
So yes. Wait, I should have my first novel over here, but I just here is my first book, The Beauty That Remains. So I feel like with both of these stories, and with most of the stories that I write, I always start with character. I tend to have a voice in my head. I feel like a lot of writers say this, that they sort of hear their characters, and that definitely is true for me. I hear people talking that are clearly not me talking. And so I'll get an idea for a story based on that character and what they're saying and what their voice is like. So for instance, with The Beauty That Remains, the first thing I heard was, and it's often the beginning of the book. I feel like a lot of times the start of my stories stay the same even through the whole editorial process. So the first thing I heard with The Beauty That Remains was a character saying, I just saw you yesterday. And this book is a book about grief, and it's about loss. And it's sort of like that unbelievable feeling when you just saw someone yesterday. Like, how could they be here one day and then like not be here the very next day? It just feels very unreal. And so I started thinking about, okay, a character who would say that, who was going through that, like what would be their story? And so that was kind of where that came from. And then similarly with When You Were Everything, I knew I was writing a story. I knew I wanted to write a friendship breakup story just because that was something that I had experienced so many times in my life and I had never read a novel about it. And so, yeah, what ultimately happened was I heard this character's voice as well. And the first line of this book is, everything feels like a memory in a city when it snows. And so I sort of started thinking about like a character who would have that sort of dreamy kind of personality and dreamy way of looking at the world. What kind of expectations would she put on like the people in her life? And then when they inevitably didn't live up to sort of this like unrealistic rose tinted way that she had of looking at the world, like what would the fallout be? So that was kind of how they came together. Those stories.
That's great. And then I guess with the stars and the blackness between them, did the voices, did they come that distinctly, or do you feel like you had to work at them?
I feel like I felt like they were persistent.
And also tell us a little bit about those.
Oh, yeah. So the stars of Blackness, it's a coming of age love story between two Black girls, one from Minneapolis and one from Trinidad. And the girl from Trinidad is sent to live with her Black American father once her queerness becomes apparent to her mom. And she has a very kind of mystical, witchy, spiritual relationship with her grandma. So anyhow, the girl in Minneapolis is named Mabel and is discovered to be sick with a serious illness. And the girls are essentially like in this path of healing each other and themselves. And there's also a man on death row who's an astrologer. I don't know if I share too much or too little. I feel like there's
that's good.
So yeah, I think what was the question now? I went into that journey and I don't know where I was.
The question was, how do you start your story?
Oh, how did I start my story? So the first thing that came to me with this book was I was like, all right, I was like very deeply ensconced in activism with the Black Lives Matter movement and just kind of really reflecting a lot on grief. And just the sense of, like sort of like this kind of ambiguous kind of like, distinctive grief of that time. And the first sort of like kernel of the story was that there's a kid who has a serious illness and is like on the brink of death. And there's this man on death row, a Black man who's on the brink of death, So kind of like, what are the ways that we can have compassion and sense of insight between these different ways of being embodied in Blackness and destined for sort of a finite life, you know? So, but then it got more like deeper than that. Then it's like, initially it wasn't a queer story. Initially it was a boy leading character.
That's interesting.
I know. I always feel like, should I tell people that? I don't know.
No, I think that's really fascinating.
Yeah, I think so. I was being mentored by Alexis Duval, who's like this really brilliant, like queer Black writer, like on so many levels. And she was just like, yo, you know, you want to write you a gay book, write your gay book.
I love that.
But then when
we all gotta write at least one.
I feel like all of mine are gonna be, you know, just for the like exact like sort of not lack of stories, but like depth of imagination I have for queer stories in my spirit. And I feel like ways that I feel like makes more sense in the world that I've come to know, you know. But yeah, I feel like I don't know. So yeah, I think for me, like that was the kernel. I think with all kinds of stories, sometimes it can be a thing people say, like you said, I could write a poem from somebody's perspective. But I literally feel like it's spirits, you know, like people kind of being with me and letting me communicate them.
I love that. You know, I saw this tweet. This is going to get like much deeper, but I feel like we're already there. I saw this tweet that was talking about being queer and how coming out sometimes is like, it almost takes a bit of grief. Like when you get to the point where your family is like, you're out and you're cool as a person of color, when you're out and your family's like accepting of it, or maybe they're not, even those interactions with your family, it's like, it is almost like everyone's grieving the person you used to be, you know? And like this weird sense of like, and I don't know, I think I feel like with my family, this weird sense of like, I'm this person, nothing has really changed because I've thought I was queer for a very long time. But when I came out in college, it was like this weird shift of like, I feel like it almost was like a mourning period or a continuous mourning period of that person. And I guess I'm curious if you're okay answering this about your coming out experiences and how you feel that has informed your work, or if it has at all, you know? Or do you feel like maybe coming out is every day for you?
First. I can go first. So I came out very, very recently. It was something that had been on my mind for a long time, but it was not. And I also think that a lot of it had to do with the way that I was raised, sort of a clusterfuck, if you will.
Okay.
The way I was raised by erasure, heteronormativity, and just sort of religion, I guess. Sort of all of these things coming together to make me feel like, well, you can't be queer if you like guys, like, you know what I mean? Or if you're attracted to, like, you can think, I remember the very first time, my mother is very, very accepting, and we've had like lots of conversations about it now. But I remember the very first time I told my mom that I thought one of my classmates was pretty. And she was like, it's okay to think girls are pretty. But like the way that she said it made it feel like it was like not okay at all.
She was like correcting herself in her head, like, oh wait.
Yeah. And like I've like since made fun of her about that. Like her first reaction to me like showing any kind of like non-hetero like anything. And we've like laughed about it since then. But I feel like that is a really good example of like why it took me so long to sort of realize like what was happening. Yeah. I even tweeted like not that long ago that like what was the gayest thing you did before?
Oh my God, that was the best tweet, because yours by far out of everyone's was bonkers. I was just like, Ashley, you're so gay.
I need to see that. I need to
you gotta share that. Yeah, sure.
So the gayest thing I did before I knew I was queer was that I literally had a Tumblr that was all boobs when I was in college. and like the title or like the little, you have to write like a little like description of your blog, and the description was like, I'm just a straight girl who loves boobs. Anyway, to circle back to the actual question, my coming out has been an ongoing kind of thing because I was already, I had already like dated mostly guys in my life. I had been interested in girls, but never really pursued it. I'm married. I have a baby, married to a man, I should say. I have a child. So it's kind of an ongoing thing where I have to always sort of assert it and assert myself and validate myself on a regular basis with a lot of different people. When I came out to, I feel like the person I came out to most recently was my father, and he is a minister. And he has admitted to me that he was like, I've been homophobic my whole life. And so we've had a lot of really interesting conversations around that and about that. But I think he's working on it. I don't think he's 100% there, like on the acceptance level. And I think it's sort of easy for him to not think about it because I am married to a man and I do live a largely heteronormative lifestyle. So we're working on him, but everybody else has been great.
Let's switch and then we'll talk about how it's influenced your work.
Sorry.
Okay. What was the story about, the exact question about coming out? Just so I don't.
Yeah, so it was kind of about, grief and coming out.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I thought about it mostly because both of you talk a lot about grief. And like, I was just curious, like your relationship with your coming out experience, and then how that's influenced your work, if it has at all.
Yeah. So I came out, I think, to myself at a very young age, like I think in my spirit, I knew that I always loved relationships with women. Like that to me feels like home. And it feels like, it's like a natural part of myself. But I also am attracted to men. And I think at the time had very, especially like as I got older, I was studying like Black conscious thought. And in a lot of those spaces, there was a lot of like heteronormativity.
Yes, a lot.
Patriarchy, a lot. So I feel like there was a place in me that like, I just kind of categorized my queerness as a thing that was a thing I could repress, so I didn't come out till later in life, till I was like 30. And it's interesting because the upbringing I'm Caribbean. Both my parents, my father's Crucian, my mother's Trinidadian. And they're both like, were raised very staunchly religious, but when they were raising their children, they didn't raise us religiously. And my mom always had like a very sort of eclectic group of friends, like she's not like, like she had friends who are West Indian, but she had friends from all over, like people who are Ethiopian, Vietnamese, white. Like one of her best friends was this gay white woman. And I remember similarly, I didn't tell my mom somebody was pretty, but I remember asking my mom at 9 being like, is it wrong to be gay? I asked her that, which to me, I'm like, gosh, like, I don't even remember what I was thinking about that question. But I remember her being like, Miss TJ is gay. And, what do you think about her? And I was like, she's nice. She's like, okay. It's very unique. Not unique, but I think it's like, it's certainly a part of the like, experience of queerness in the Caribbean. It's not everybody is so caught up in the religiosity. And even with people who are very religious, there's ways that there's an acceptance or a strong reaction, like I think, so I guess my coming out thing was like, I think in a lot of the ways that I sort of mourned that I didn't live like my 20s, like out and queer and all these hot ass women.
Right.
And, like that's what I grieve.
Like that,
that's what I grieve.
I have that grief. I definitely have that grief.
Yeah, like I don't be grieving. Like, I mean, like I think like, damn, like I let these people get up in my head and my coochie enough that I didn't go live my best self.
Right.
And that's why I give thanks to the younger generation. I'm just like, y'all aren't letting like other people's grief around the sexuality that they sacrificed you know what I mean, sort of contort your experience of yourself, you know? And I mean, that probably for sure leads into our work, you know?
Yeah.
We do.
Yeah. And well, that's the thing. So I'm curious, like, how do you think the ways in which you are queer became queer influence your work, right? Because I think they are two different things. I think, you know, I've definitely seen it manifest in so many different ways in terms of like people feeling like they must write this very queer story, which of course in some ways is like a burden to carry, of being like, oh, I'm one of the few people who's going to be published with this very, very queer story in a market that is just now seeming to me more accepting of queer stories, or the person who's like, I don't have time for this mess. I'm just, I'm doing whatever, you know?
Yeah. For me, it's been sort of circling. I feel like I'm circling closer and closer to telling my actual story. And
well, don't you have like a book coming out that's about two cheerleaders? Did you tell me that, or is that actually?
So that was something that,
is that a joke?
That was something that was tweeted. So somebody was like, if you could write a book with any other author, like what would you write and what would it be about? And I said, I would want to write a gay Bring It On with Nick Stone.
We should just like do it.
Yes.
So it's on the list. It's on the list.
Okay.
But all that to say,
and I love Nick Stone. Nick Stone is so awesome. I'm just friends with her recently, and she's the shit.
Yeah, so I feel like I'm just like circling closer and closer to like, so in my first book, there's a gay white boy, right? In this book, there is her new friends are queer girls. She sort of befriends these two queer girls. And I have another book. This little guy.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Called Fly Girls.
When did it come out?
This comes out in September.
Okay.
It's the first one in a series of 4. And they're reluctant reader.
Well, I love how small that size is.
So they're super short, very, very quick. But there's going to be 4 of these. And the last 2 of this series are super queer.
Oh, yay. I love that.
So yeah, I feel like I'm slowly like circling closer. And then I'm working on like a secret thing that's very queer. So yeah, I think as far as like the way it informed my work, it's like, it's sort of been me sort of figuring out how I want to talk about queerness. Yeah. And you can sort of see it in the way that queerness, like the thread of queerness that goes through all of my books. It's like a white gay boy feels very, very safe because it's so different from me. And then sort of these queer girls, one of them is questioning, one of them is definitely gay, and When You Were Everything. That's like a little bit closer, right? And then in Fly Girls, they are going to be queer girls of color. And so I'm sort of like getting closer and closer to like telling my actual story. I'll get there eventually.
No, but I think first I was going to say, I think you should take as long as you want to take.
Yeah.
Or not at all. And I think also, I guess, do you feel pressure now that you're out to write queer stories? Like, do you feel like people are like, where's your queer Black story? Or do you feel like people are just like, do you feel any pressure at all? Or have you put pressure on yourself, I guess?
Yeah, I don't think I feel pressure. Most of the short stories that I'm writing, like I have 2 short stories that are coming out later. Those are both super gay. So I'm just kind of like taking my time. But yeah. What about you?
About how my coming out my experience of my queerness, how it affects my writing and my queerness.
Yeah.
I think like the way that this book kind of happened, it's like, cause I do a lot of different kinds of art, but I feel like all of my art very much has been kind of like rituals of healing around, I guess like the repression of my totality, you know, like I think a lot of my sort of stepping into myself as an artist has been in like, what areas of my life have I not felt like I could be authentic? So like in the space of, you know, writing a young adult book, I very much wanted to reflect on like what were the stories that I really probably would have been fed to read as a young Black queer kid. Like, you know, I was always looking for something sexy. I was like, where, you know what I mean? Like I love books to kind of transport me in that way, and also give me insight around how do I be sexual, you know, or what are ways of being sexual. So there was like that component. And then also, how do I sort of fill in an imagination around queerness that doesn't exist just in the current youth generation? I think like every youth generation feels like, oh my God, we're holding queerness as this like new magical secret. And we're taught, you know what I mean? Like we're really taught to sort of not see queerness and ancestry and queerness and multi-generations. So, and like working on this book, I was like, yeah, like I wanted to sort of kind of create for myself an opportunity to be like, yeah, like there was queer people in the Harlem Renaissance, obviously, queer people in the civil rights, queer people everywhere. We was everywhere, there. You know what I'm saying? So like, I think that's been like sort of exciting for me to feel powerful as a creator. Like I don't have to, I think like, and it's kind of interesting because I came out at around the same time I came out as an artist. I was like an educator and a teacher and things like that. So I think like queerness just became a part of my work in this way that I didn't question as much. But I do feel like, I don't know, even in the new projects I'm working in, it's not like I'm like, oh, I need to tell queer narratives. I'm just like, queer narratives are all around me. Like,
so like
even, them out, stories, even in straight stories, like I think even in heterosexual situations, like your life, Ashley, like people aren't straight. You know what I mean? Like even in stories that we thought were straight stories, those stories weren't straight. So like it's like kind of like pulling back the veil over like people feeling like, oh, there's a straight world and a queer world. It's like often these worlds are we're all interwoven, and a lot of people need to decolonize from their own repressed queerness. Not to say everybody's gay, but everybody did something gay, you know? Like you're fucking.
I was gonna say, like, even like when I was writing this, like thinking about friendship as romance. Like friendship is so romantic, or at least it can be. And I feel like especially with very emotional friendships, very close friendships, especially with women, but I think also with men, like you tend to fall in love with your friends a little bit. And I think some of the most fulfilling and best friendships that I've had are friendships that were a little bit romantic. Some of the messiest ones were that way too.
Sure.
I mean, there is a romance. I've definitely had that experience with friendships.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, I think like that's the thing I talk about often is like the queerness in friendships, you know, like I think that you don't have to be sexually queer to live into queerness within your relationship.
I love that. That's a whole quote. That's brilliant.
Yeah, and I think like young people specifically are like that. Like, I mean, and working with young people, they're fascinated with each other's bodies and smells and feelings and sensations. And I remember being that way, and I didn't code it as sexual or necessarily romantic, but as an adult and having language and context, I'm like, oh yeah, like I certainly felt territorial over her because of the way I'd invested in this romance of a friendship. You know what I mean? And feel like, who's this? No.
Right.
So yeah, I think and that's like the beauty of writing young adult. It's like, yeah, like now I get to look back at those feelings with a certain compassion and interest and curiosity that in the moment I just didn't have the bandwidth for.
Right.
Yeah. So talk to me more about writing young adult. Like, what is it that drew you to writing young adult? What made you feel like, I mean, maybe you just knew because you were like, I love YA, etc., but maybe you didn't. What made you feel like this is a young adult novel and I need these emotionally charged feelings, and I want to return to this again and again, if you want to return to it?
I'm always trying to redo high school.
God, that's terrifying. I both love that and also I'm like cringing imagining like experience. I'm like, oh guys.
I mean, I just think about what my high school experience might have been like had I known half the shit that I know now.
Oh, that's.
And I'm sure when I'm like 45, right, or 50, I'll look back on my 30s and think the same thing. Because I know I look back on my 20s, like I'm in my 30s now, and I look back on my 20s and I'm like, man, girl, you're in danger, girl. and so I just think like high school was a mess, and and so for me, it is both a reaching back to my former self and a reaching out to kids that are dealing with all this crap now.
I love that. So it's like a generational link. Like you feel like you're connected.
Yeah. So I sort of want to impart my wisdom in a not preachy way, to be like, look, you're going to be messy. It's cool. But like, here are some tools that I have learned that you
better be messy. Let me help you be less messy.
Yeah. Like, here's how to be slightly less messy. Yeah, I feel like you're being like so eloquent, and I'm just like, yo.
Oh, it's all the same. Like, I think we all need several kinds of aunties and big sisters in these streets, you know?
Yeah.
And I think, but I totally agree. Like, but when you were talking about redoing high school, I feel like that's like my next book in a lot of ways. And I think also in a lot of ways, even the last book I wrote, like I yearn for relationships with elders in my life that we could talk about their sexual experiences. And
that's
actually Alexis Duveau, who's like my mentor and like play mama, she totally is like a little freak Nick, you know what she said to me? And I just love hearing her talk about how much she likes to get it, you know? And, I think like that's sort of my thing. It's like, what is this aspirational energy?
Yes, I love that.
Yeah. What's the thing? But when you're talking about reliving high school, like, I feel like there's certain things that I wish that I too would have known, and also too would have felt bold in doing, you know? Because a lot of that shit was like, damn, I was so caught up in what people thought of me and yada, yada, yada. And I just want like Black kids, like we're talking about that cinnamon roll, dark-skinned boy in your book, Ashley. Yeah, like, they shouldn't have to have a complex around softness. You know, Black people are forced to have a complex around our softness. That's like our strength, especially given all of our ancestral trauma. It's like the fact that we're soft is a magical power, you know?
Well, I think it's just hard because so many Black kids have to figure things out. I mean, you were talking about sex, like I can't even, like, I try not to think about that, how many different ways I had to figure those things out in ways that I'm like, oh yeah, queer sex should just be talked about so that way kids don't make dumb decisions.
Right.
But like, I feel the same way also about like, you know, different things about Blackness, like figuring out your softness. Okay. You often have to go through so many hard moments before you're like, oh, this is a strength.
Oh, like it's okay to cry.
Yeah, it's okay to cry. Exactly. So I think we have only a few minutes left. I would love to know, I always want to know, what are you reading? What are you listening to? Are there books that, and I'm also curious that the one thing you have to answer in this of like, what are you reading? What are you watching? What are you listening to? Were there books that really helped you when you were younger? Or maybe books you found now that you were like, I needed this.
Yeah. I always talk about Nick's Odd One Out. Like, if I had that book when I was 15, like, that would have blown my little baby gay mind.
So many questions answered.
So I always talk about that one as one that I wish I had when I was younger. Also, Becky Albertalli's, oh God, I'm going to forget the name of it.
Which one?
The one about the bi girl.
Oh, Leah.
Leah on the Offbeat.
Yeah.
She is also, I mentioned both of these books because they have characters who are questioning. And I think that questioning is such an important part of the sort of sexual orientation story.
Yes.
I don't know, that's just so important, and people don't talk about it very much. And those are two books that really examine it in a way that I think is like was really helpful for me as someone who was questioning at, you know, in their late 20s, early 30s, was questioning for a long time, but just realized that they were questioning like a few years ago.
But I also think it's like good that you said that, because I think with both of you, it's like, I think it's so rare for people to actually be okay with people being questioning, and also just talk about the fact that you could be questioning and be in your 30s.
Right.
And that's also fine. You can be questioning and be in your 60s, and that's fine, you know?
Yeah.
And you can be questioning and be in sexual practice too. And
yes,
you know what I mean? Like, I feel like that's the thing I was interested in. Like, I feel like there's a way, like, you feel like you got to identify, and there's also ways that you feel like you got to identify and not be in a physical practice. You know what I mean? Like, I think I felt like, oh, I needed to do a certain amount of, you know, hookups with certain kinds of bodies to be able to identify. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I feel that. Your book recs. What books do you feel, or it doesn't have to be books, it can be, maybe it's a movie, maybe it's a TV show.
I just read Midnight Lie by Maria Koski. So I keep talking about that book.
Yes, no, it is
continue talking.
So good. Please continue.
I really love the movie Blue is the Warmest Color. It was very much a sexual awakening for me.
I love it.
Ooh,
it's a French film. It's based.
No, I've seen the film.
Okay.
But I'm curious about your sexual awakening experience about it. But continue on with your thing.
This is when we like just move on. Don't leave the chat. Don't take audience questions.
I mean, I won't like go super into it, but it was just like
I've seen it too. Yeah.
Where I was watching female bodies together, and I was like, oh wow, like this makes me feel things.
Yes, yes. And it was also so. And I also think, I don't know. I feel like I have a problem when I watch a lot of like stuff where there's female relationships, and I'm just like, that sex feels inaccurate. I don't know. I just feel like it's like more for a different person's gaze. And I felt like that one was so perfectly queer, delightful.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I like them. I also liked in that movie how you saw people pursue other women. Like, I think that's also a thing that, like, I didn't know how to talk to people when I was attracted to them in queer situations. Like, I always felt like, because we're always taught like this heteronormativity, like, oh yeah, like, the masculine person comes and they talk to you and you like whatever, you know?
Yeah.
But I love this idea of questioning. Sorry, well, I should give you my book recs.
Yeah.
So I've been kind of going back to like some Enzozake Shange.
Okay, yeah.
So, you know, like, I think there's like all of these like Black feminist writers who like really influenced me as a young person who wrote YA in a way. You know what I mean? Like, I think The Bluest Eye is YA. I think
they definitely were writing for teens. Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I've been kind of curious to just sort of those voices and why they spoke to me. Who else have I been reading? I've been wanting to jump into some Murakami again, which is this Japanese kind of like I don't even know how to describe his writing, but to me,
we know him.
What's your favorite? I guess that's the best way of putting it.
Well, I'm rereading the Wind Up Bird Chronicle, which is somewhat inspiring, like, not the book specifically, but just some of the ideas of my next work, you know? What else am I reading? I'm literally having to look at.
I was looking too.
I've been reading like poetry. I've been wanting to just like get back into just having my mind be stimulated in ways that are certainly within the work I do, but also adjacent. And also just reading a lot more YA. I kind of stumbled into YA as a writer because I really was like more of a performance artist, filmmaker type of person. But I like just so love this world. And like there's so many things that y'all have shared with me. I'm reading Nick's work. Because she's just such a badass, and I'm like, oh, like now I feel like there's just all these cool ass people I'm getting to know.
I love it.
So yeah. And
okay.
Anyway,
very quickly, tell me about what you're working on next. Like,
so I am editing or revising the next book in that Fly Girls series. I'm working on a novel in verse.
Yes, love it.
But like, who knows? Who knows when that'll come out? It is not under contract. It's just kind of a thing that I'm writing because I needed somewhere to put feelings.
We need those things that are just out there, you know.
Yeah, and it's nice to be writing something that doesn't have a deadline.
Absolutely.
So Fly Girls is on a deadline, and then I'm working on an Obama biography with Macmillan, which is awesome and exciting. So yeah.
Oh, that sounds dope. I'm working on another book, and it's another YA book, and it takes place in the 90s, and it's sort of like a girl's spiritual journey into her sexuality and into circus. Was one of the things I used to do, yeah, that kind of like awakened me as an artist with circus art. So that's like going to be an opportunity to just nerd out on circus, nerd out on Black bodies within the circus realm and all of this stuff. Yeah, working on some, you know, smaller personal film projects and what else? Yeah, I just wrote an erotic piece for Autostraddle.
That is so cool.
Yeah, I'm like so nervous about it. I'm just like, is this sexy enough? Is this too sexy? Is it weird sexy? Like, I'm just like overthinking it. Because I'm like, well, this is my chance to be nasty. And then I'm thinking like, okay, well.
Then you want to rein yourself in. You're like.
Yeah, and this is maybe a question for y'all too, just like as a young adult writer and wanting to write in other spaces, you know what I mean? I'm like, is that taboo? Do people even care?
It's not taboo.
It's not taboo. Some people change pen names, but I'm also like, I read a lot of erotica. I read a lot of crazy stuff as a teen, and so I think I think I'm fine. You know, it's like, I don't know. I'm like, I'll let people's parents regulate them.
They'll find it.
They will
find it. Yeah, cool. Hey, I'm glad I asked y'all.
So this has been amazing. I think Rachel's supposed to come in and get some audience questions.
Yeah.
Okay. So
my video will start. Hi, y'all. This has been really, really great. Thanks so much for this awesome conversation. You've covered like so much.
I feel like we literally could have talked about sex and sexuality for a good hour. Which, note to self, we're gonna make this happen at some point.
Yes.
Yeah, you should. This is awesome. I feel like I could listen to this for like 3 more hours. We have a few audience questions. Our first one is from Savannah, who wants to know from all of you, in any medium, what is the #1 relationship you stand?
Oh.
What? Are you asking about our ships? That's dangerous.
That's aggressive.
Oh, hold on. I don't even think I understood the question.
Like in any film, book, I think I'm understanding it right. Like if you, in any film, any book, any, I guess, story, play, whatever.
What are your favorite 2 characters?
What's your favorite relationship?
Okay.
Not necessarily of ours, but in work that we've.
Yeah. Anything that you've consumed.
It could be your own.
I actually think I have one. So I'm just I'm gonna cheat kind of and just go with one of the first ones. And I know a lot of people, so I was really into the Shadowhunter series when I was, not when I was growing up. I was into the Shadowhunter series, and there's a character, Magus Vane, and
Maggie.
And I think for me, that was one of the first times I saw Matt Malik. It was one of the first times I saw queer people. I was like, oh my God. And they were queer, but they weren't talking about, I mean, they had all this sadness and strife, but it was like joyful, you know? There was a lot of joyfulness to it. And I kind of was like, oh, I can be queer and I don't have to die. Really, I don't know. It was
That's real.
Yeah, it was real. So I feel like I'll just go with that's like the first one that to me was very personal.
This is like kind of weird, but
no, please be weird.
Please.
I mean, it's probably not that weird. There's this British show called Skins.
Oh yeah.
And and again, I think this was one of those situations where I was like, why do I feel so connected to these people?
Oh my God, are you sure? Okay, continue.
And it was in the second season, there is a queer couple, Emily and Naomi, and I like love them. I would like stay up when I was in college. I think I was in college, or maybe I had just graduated college. I can't remember the timing of that season, but I would stay up late and watch these compilations on YouTube of like all the scenes of these 2 characters' interactions set to like super romantic music.
Oh my God.
And just like cry. I don't know if that's my #1, but that is like the one that is on my heart right now.
The one that came up for me was Celie and Suge from The Color Purple.
Oh my God.
I have them tattooed on me. I got Celie and Suge tattooed right there.
Did you really? That is so cool.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I was gonna say, you have to show us.
Celie, Suge. But like
that is one of my favorite books.
Huh?
Yeah, that is one of my favorite books.
Yeah, certainly. It's funny. It's one of my favorite books, but as a kid, it was one of my favorite movies.
Yeah.
Yes, the
Like,
movie
before
is
I
so
could consume
good.
the book for its genius,
Yes.
the movie and having like Whoopi Goldberg as
Yes.
like this, sort of person with heterosexuality forced on her,
Yeah.
finding
Yeah.
like genuine love
Yeah.
and like this like,
Yep.
great singer.
Well, I hadn't even read I watched the movie first before I even really knew about the book, honestly. Like,
I mean, I think most Black people did,
probably,
right?
yeah.
80s, 90s,
Most Black
Black
people around our age did.
Yeah, totally.
That's good. Okay, awesome. I love these. That's great.
Love it. Okay, we have another from
Wow,
Erin.
lawnmower. Oh my gosh.
Who wants to know, how does setting inform the relationships in your story? So time and place, how does that affect the relationships you write about?
All the books that I've written take place in New York.
Oh wow. Yeah.
And I think that's just because, I've lived here for the last 10 years. But I think that New York tends to make itself known, so it turns into its own kind of character in most of my stories. So yeah, I don't know if it influences the characters specifically, but it definitely influences the way that certain things happen to the characters. Like, I feel like me and my friends always say, like, you can never have like an average day in New York. It's always like amazing or like the worst day of your life. And so that's basically the way that
New York State.
Yeah, that's basically the way these books are too.
Yeah, I write, and mainly from Minneapolis, that's where I was born and raised. I've also lived in New York and have written part of my book in New York. Both my parents are Caribbean, so I think these are geographies that have been very important to the shaping of who I am and how I understand existence. I mean, Minneapolis is like this most immediate, like it's like the bread, everything of how I understand life. But New York was really what shaped me into like my womanhood and my identityhood in a ways. And the Caribbean is like kind of like half myth, half like, real place, like part of it is like the realest places ever, but they're also places that I knew so much via story and via like the feelings my parents had with them. So I think like, that's kind of how it sets. And I do feel like when writing Black people from Minneapolis, a lot of people don't even think Black people live in Minneapolis. We got Prince out here. They still don't even, they still don't hear us. They still don't hear us. So for me, like, I really wanted to create work that's like, like, here are these Black people, like navigating lakes and biking and trees and the seasons and it's a city, you know what I mean? And it's like a decent sized city, because I do feel like we don't get to have much senses of our identity beyond like a couple of geographic locations. So, but even like you writing within New York, like there's ways that people don't only understand New York in a very specific, like Friends and Seinfeld way.
Right.
You know what I mean? That I think is important to write from.
Yeah.
Okay, we got time for like 2 more real quick. River wants to know, how do you pick a cover for your book? And does the cover art always accurately represent your characters? They say, I'm thinking about how I read Mabel as more butch, but didn't necessarily see that on the cover. So I guess also a bigger conversation.
Now I am like, ooh, let's spill the tea. No,
Yeah. No, I mean, I'll totally answer that. But Ashley, I want to hear from you, because you also have so many more covers. You know what I mean? Like for me, I've only had my one little tender cover.
Because I'm curious, because we've talked about some of this, so I'm very curious.
Yeah. So the original cover for my first book did not have people on it. It was just like super colorful, and we went back and forth about that a lot before settling on it. I feel like the simple answer to this question is authors don't have as much say as you would think that they do. But once they went back and they decided to repackage my first book, the only thing that I was really picky about was I was like, please hire illustrator of color to illustrate the book. And I basically gave them descriptions of the characters that either I pulled directly from the book or that I just like told them this is what this person looks like. And then he drew, the illustrator drew based on that. There are a couple things that I would change. Like, I feel like this character wouldn't wear giant hoop earrings, but these are like minor details. And similarly with this one, I was like, please use an author or an illustrator of color. And the illustrator they picked is also queer, which was awesome. And their name is Bex. I could probably provide their Instagram after this because it's awesome. But we went back and forth about sort of what the layout of this would be, but not the characters. Bex got the characters right pretty much right away.
But I think but what you said, honestly, to me that matters, because just thinking about the anthology cover, it was Phoenix First Most, it was a Black woman. She, and like literally, like from the sketch, I was like, is it?
Yes.
You know?
And same here, like with the illustrator is an illustrator of color, and she, like, you can kind of tell, like, this is clearly a Black girl.
Yeah, no, it is.
And all of the books just have the profile, and then it has like sort of a cityscape inside of it. So
yeah, no, I think that's very key.
Yeah, well, with my book, like, so I feel similarly. Like, I kind of am a control freak a little bit, and also it's my personal book. I don't know what y'all gonna be thinking, what y'all seeing, and what I'm feeling. So like, I did have a Pinterest board up, and just kind of like, for me, like, part of it was just like my process of like thinking about the book and what I was seeing. But one thing, I mean, I feel like the person who did it was brilliant. His name is Charles Chazon, person of color.
Oh yeah, I know. Yeah.
You know Charles? Yeah, and also queer. So I felt like there was things that like I really appreciated as far as the shorthand. And similarly, like, I feel like there's little things that I'm like, oh, well, I kind of saw her a little thicker in my head. You know what I mean? Like, there's things like that feels like, all right, part of it is that I'm an artist that had my artistic experience in the writing of the book. And, you know, I certainly got like, you know, questions, and they showed me sketches at certain parts. But also I kind of wanted the artist to also be an artist that got to really interpret things as part of their experience.
I will say though, thickness is something that I personally always notice. I feel like artists never make people as thick as the author. I've noticed this from many authors who'll be like, oh, I thought this character's thicker. And I'm like, yeah, that's a conversation for another day. But like, what is that?
I feel like Cleo is a little thick.
Yeah, actually.
Yeah, but also darker. Like, part of it is and like
darker,
I had one of my characters, like Audrey was darker. But that is interesting thinking about masculinity too. You know,
and
like
skin tone. I noticed that a lot with skin tone. Yeah, darkness. Yeah, Black girls.
Yeah, because what our spectrum of color is very different than how white folks understand our darkness. You know.
Yeah.
We could have like a separate panel about this, I feel like.
I mean, colorism, we can talk about that
for days. We just have one more quick question for all of you, which is, what advice would you give to young Black writers and queer writers and artists who are looking to find some creative community as they maybe launch their career, or even just try to find community as they're, you know, working on whatever they're working on?
Like how to find community as a writer, as a Black woman.
Yeah, like an artistic community.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of what I experienced is just going and seeing other people's work who you like and respect, you know? And I think like every city is different. Like, I think, you know, there's bigger cities, obviously, where there's just like so many options. And then there's smaller cities where there's less options or no options in that realm. But I think like for me, before I didn't have as much time. Like, now I feel like I'm so busy doing my art in ways that like I like to not think about art when I'm kicking it with the homie. You know, just chill, just pop up. But like, I do think that just going and seeing art that inspired me, you know, really was a way that I started, you know, to be vulnerable and connect in community, especially when I moved back from New York, back to Minneapolis, and was pursuing work as an artist, you know. Yeah, and just like putting yourself out there, you know, like finding, you know, opportunities to share your own work, and get over this sort of barrier of like, oh, should I be out here? Should I be an artist? Like, I think finding people who maybe even aren't artists, but like our friends who are devoted to you fulfilling your bliss, you know, like having people who you share with who have the bandwidth to show you love and not necessarily critique, but just continue. And different literary centers. I know Minneapolis has the Loft. Haha. Sorry, I was even trying to plug y'all and I did. But yeah, we got the Loft and, you know, Black Table Arts and Free Black Dirt, my collective. So yeah, every city got their vibe.
Yeah, I'll say Twitter can be a very volatile place, but I think it also has the potential to be a great networking tool if you use it in a way, if you use it in a certain way. I think following people whose work you admire and interacting with them online is sometimes an easier barrier to sort of overcome than, you know, maybe getting up the nerve to email someone or going to meet them in person. But, you know, a retweet with like a comment or sending someone a DM if there's something that they're working on that you're really into, or if you read a book and you loved it, you know, reaching out to someone and telling them that. I think that's a great way to connect with people as well. And I mean, as far as like continuing your work, I think the main piece of advice that I have for anyone who is working on anything creative is to just be relentless. Because there will be plenty of people that will tell you no, that will tell you it's not worth it, that will tell you it'll never, you know, become anything bigger than what it is. But all you really need is one person to say yes. And so, yeah, so like be relentless when it comes to your creative work and your creative goals. And yeah, just be nice to people, and those networks will sort of organically create themselves.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I feel like for me, I would just say, you know, I think that like community building is like, it's a process, right? Like, I feel like that's something that I have learned. Like, I feel like now I have found my network, but I actually feel like I've had many networks, and I just now feel that maybe like the network I have is like sustainable and like amazing, you know? And so I think be gentle with yourself as you're going through that process, as you're finding like the people who really get you in your work, and understand you for you, like not just for like, I don't know, I guess like for different things. I think it's like, you know, I think it takes time to find sometimes that right group. And then I also would just say, you know, I think give yourself permission. Like, I feel like I get DMs often, they're like asking questions, and it always kind of boils down to like, do you think I can write this thing? Tell me that I can write this thing. And I think ultimately, like, I can say that you can write it, but I think you still have to believe in yourself. So I would say just give yourself permission to like write the thing you want to do the thing you want to do. And it's okay to be afraid, but just don't let the fear hold you back.
Yeah. Well, thanks, y'all. We are out of time for this one, but I just feel like I could listen to you all talk forever. Just once again, a reminder for everyone watching that you can and should go buy our authors' books from Red Balloon Bookshop. There's a link on this page. While you're there at that link, you can also throw a few dollars toward the Loft. We make programs like this possible year-round. Opportunities for writers to practice their craft, share their work. We host events, creative writing classes, all that good stuff, and it's all moving online for summer. So check it out. Check out our website and consider making a donation if you are able to support nonprofit arts in this very weird time. Once again, thanks to our presenting sponsors, St. Catherine University and the Star Tribune, and to our authors. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah.
This was
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye.